one of the things which is good to say at this point is that, there's the old cliche, and it's not a cliche, it's really life, that says it's very easy to take a Jew out of Egypt. It's quite another story to take Egypt out of the Jew, right? And this is true not just of Jews, it's true of all of mankind, right? Freeing slaves, I thank you very much. Yeah. Freeing slaves is a job. Giving slaves freedom is a virtual impossibility. And you understand why, because a slave is not just a physical condition. It's a mental condition. It's a psychological condition. If you're a slave for a week and you're free, so you're not a slave anymore. But if you're a slave for months and years and decades and generations, you don't just end slavery because the master died. That's not the way it works. You can even read the accounts of the Nazis disappearing from the death camps in the last days, in the end of April, beginning of May. And in some places it happened as early as February, depending on where the camps were situated, in Germany or in Poland or in Russia. And the Jewish people who are left behind don't know what to do. They just don't know what to do, and you have to have liberators. In other words, the camp was gone, the Nazis disappeared, and then people have to come and free them. It's a separate event. Now, of course, freeing the Jews from the death camp was not a simple matter at all, and I don't want to get all caught up in this. It's still going on. We're still freeing ourselves from the death camp. I have a friend who's much younger than I am who says to me, I'm a survivor of the Holocaust. And he really, really is. He really is. His father is seriously messed up. And he did a wonderful job at messing up his children. I mean, really, really terrible. He said, I'm a survivor of the Holocaust. And it's true. He is a survivor of the Holocaust. It goes on. But anyway, so becoming technically free is not the same thing as becoming legitimately free. Because, of course, technically free means that nobody owns me. Legitimately free means I own me. And there's a lot of space between nobody owns me and I own myself. Because owning yourself is a responsibility. Owning oneself is choices. Owning oneself is taking that responsibility and exercising those choices and so on. So, of course, the story of the Exodus, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, is not only about taking the Jew out of Egypt. It is very, very much about taking Egypt out of the Jew. It's very much about taking Egypt out of the Jew. And that's why it's such a long story. That's why it's in the Chumash, and that's why it's Shmois and Va'era, and boy, it's a story that goes on for pages and pages and details, because all of these details are not about technically liberating the Jewish people from their slavery. It's about giving them freedom. Giving them freedom. And of course, one of the most basic aspects of that freedom is a basic Jewish belief, which is really, really, honestly, common sense, even though it's not intuitively so. In other words, you would never say this. But if you'll think about it seriously and honestly, you'll appreciate that this is the case. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, there's nobody free unless one is engaged in learning of Torah. In other words, we're not free because we have no master. We're free because God is our master. If freedom means I can do whatever I want and I have no master, freedom is another form of slavery. I mentioned this to you, and I was shocked when I saw it, that a group, an organization that was coming to the Rebbe in the late 80s, early 90s, when there was a real exodus of Russian Jews, 500,000 Russians. I don't know how many of them were Jewish, but tons of people left Russia at that time. And there was discussion about them moving to Israel or moving to the United States. The Rebbe felt very strongly that you can't force. The Rebbe publicly once spoke about not forcing Russians to go to Israel. Let them choose where they want to go. But at the same time, the Rebbe said you should convince them to go to Israel. Don't force them, but convince them. And these were the Rebbe's words. If they don't move to Israel, they're moving from one Galus to another Galus. If they move to Israel, they're moving from Galus to Chassidus. If they move from Russia to America, they're going from one exile to another exile. If they move from Russia to the Eretz Yisrael, they're going from exile to freedom. And the Rebbe didn't mean it in the political sense, he meant it in the religious sense. A free person is empowered. A free person that I can do whatever I want, I can indulge in any animalism I choose, is being empowered. And therefore the Mishnah says, we're not free in not having a master, we're free in having a master. We're free in the fact that God is our master. And this deserves a conversation. This deserves a conversation. The idea that you're only free if you accept Hashem as your master deserves a conversation because it's so un-Western. It's so un-American,
Paradox.
It sounds like a paradox. It's not a paradox. It's a truism. I want to tell you something. I grew up in the house of an immigrant. My father's Russian. My father was born in Moscow. My father came to this country when he was around 15 years old. My father is a very interesting person, a most interesting human being, and unfortunately not very well understood. He's one of those people who's so deep and so smart that he's people don't get him. Mamish. He's mamish. But I'm his son, and I get him a little bit. And one of the many things that my father gave me as an education was we would walk to shul. This didn't happen once, this happened 50 times. And he would talk about America. My father's love for America, I love America. I really love America. There's no Obama in me at all. And I don't mean Obama because he's African American. I mean Obama because he hates America. Or he wants a different America. It's not nice. He hates America. He's the president of the United States. But my father loves America. He really loves America, and he has an understanding of America. An understanding of America that comes from his reading and from his education. He's a very smart man. When I was a kid, I didn't know what he was talking about. I thought he was like everything else my father says, beating a kettle, just talking nonsense. But as I got older and smarter and humbler, I started to understand what he was talking about. And he would talk about freedom. My father gave me 1,000 lectures on freedom. Now, when you're a little kid, and even when you're a big kid, what does freedom mean? Freedom means I can do whatever I want. I can eat any pizza I want. I can buy any chip I want. I can do any sin I want. My father was talking a very different concept of freedom, but when I was 9, when I heard these lectures, I wasn't intuitive enough to appreciate the depth of it all. And one of the things which really resonates, my father talked a lot about freedom. Americans are the freest people in the world. He would say this again and again and again. I didn't understand what he's talking about. Americans are the freest people. And he would say Europeans are not free, Australians are not free, and they're Western countries, the democratic countries. Americans are the freest people in the world. And he would make his case, make his argument. I know that a lot of you would say, what's the difference in America and a Frenchman or a Brit? Besides that we have different economic systems, and you can argue that our economic system is based more on freedom, but it also, there's haves and have-nots and so on and so forth. When he would try to explain to me what he means that Americans have freedom, his model, his example was Benjamin Franklin. My father loves Benjamin Franklin.
Reading his biography now.
What is it about Benjamin Franklin so amazing? He was such a character. He was a mamish. He was a real crazy guy. He was an incredible personality, Benjamin Franklin was. Benjamin Franklin is the father of America, more than George Washington. He really is the father of America. The neshama of America is more Benjamin Franklin than anybody. He was our ambassador to France, and he did incredible things, but he never really held public office. But his personality is imprinted on the American psyche. My father said Benjamin Franklin was one of the greatest inventors of all time. And he gave stuff away. He invented a lightning rod. How much money has been saved? He invented the lightning rod. When did he invent it? In the 1750s, the 1760s, way before America became a country. Way before. And he gave it away. He didn't charge. Imagine he would patent that. You know how much money that's worth? Do you know how many, it's not billions, trillions of dollars has been spared, and how much heartbreak has been spared by inventing a simple tool? He figured out what electricity was way before Faraday, and he understood that electricity travels in the nearest path, and he was able to redirect an electrical current from a lightning. Instead of hitting a house that's made of wood, it'll hit a wire, it'll go into the ground, it'll be grounded and finished. He gave it away for free. And my father would say to me, my father doesn't have a lot of words. If I was saying it to my son, I would say, why do you think you gave it away for free? And then my father would say, you know why? Free people can afford to give things away. Wow. That was the message that he gave me. As a kid, I'm not eulogizing my father, should live and be well, but this is wisdom. This kind of wisdom you don't get in school. I had the good fortune to have such a father. Only free people give things away. And then he would compare America to other countries. And he would show me over and over again, Americans are good. We really are good. We're bissel meshuggah and sometimes stupid, but we're good. And part of that goodness is when you're free, you can afford to give. You don't mind, almost being taken advantage of. And he would give me argument that look at America in the last 2.5 centuries. Look at what we've done. I don't want to start politics, because politics today is very, very, very personal and very, very, very angry. But there's so much truth to this, that when you're a free person, you're generous. Now it's weird. Why? Because you would think that when you give something, you have to have a reason to give. Why would I give you something? Because I want something back. If I don't need anything from you, why should I give you anything? And my father was trying to teach me it's exactly the other way around. It's the person who doesn't expect anything back, who doesn't need you, that's able to give. This is part of my education. I grew up in a Chassidic house, a very Chassidic house, but my father taught this to me. Very repetitive. He would say that I didn't know what he was talking about. I'm 54 years old. I heard this 40 years ago, 45 years ago. And now it's starting to make sense to me. It's very profound, because freedom means courage, right? Why is a person afraid to give something away, right? Think about your own children. Quote, you don't want your children taken advantage of, end quote. It takes a certain kind of person to say, my kids are being taken advantage of, is being taught goodness. That comes not from weakness. A weak person can't do that. Only a strong person can do that. And that's what it means to be free. That's what it means to be free. And my father would say there was never in the history of the world a nation like America. This was what he was teaching me. And as nuts as we are, and as cracked up as we are, it's really, really true. We're unbelievably generous. The amount of tzedakah America gives to the whole world is nuts. And even the people who are on the conservative right, who want to put America first, after you cut back all the kindness that America does to the world, it's still more than any country ever gave. And my father says it's rooted in freedom. He really believes that Benjamin Franklin left his mark on this country. He made over 200 inventions, you know that? And he gave stuff away, just gave stuff away. Benjamin Franklin left endowments. I had a student here many, many years ago from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia. And she said to us, probably 20 years ago, that there were endowments that Benjamin Franklin had left in the United States of America that had just matured. He put money down and says, in 200 years from today, it'll become a resource to help people. He was so forward thinking. And he gave stuff. He just gave. He put aside money and said, 50 years from today, take this money and use it to help people. In 100 years from today. Why? To do that, you have to be free. You don't give stuff away because you're a prisoner. You give stuff away because you're free. Because it comes from power, it comes from strength, it comes from courage. And of course, the word that's in between those two is the word responsibility. Empowerment, responsibility. Anyway, this is the end of my American speech, okay? I push it in the last few days. I don't know why. I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been playing this movie, man. I could see myself walking on President Street between Troy and Albany. My father's talking about Americans being free. And I'm trying to figure out how not to insult him because he's totally nonsensical. And now it's all these years later, and I'm literally reliving those conversations. And I'm appreciating them. And that's the meaning of this Mishnah. A Jew isn't free because he has no master. A Jew isn't free because he's a servant of God. Now, how is service freedom? Service is freedom because, first of all, service is chosen, not imposed. And second of all, service makes you better. It's really, really true. A person who works the least is the most pathetic. A person who works the most is the most blessed and the most successful. It really is the way of the world. It's really, really true. People who are hardworking are free. And of course, when you're working for God, if I'm working for whoever it is, if I'm working for a fellow human being, so there's a conflict of egos. I have an ego, he has an ego, he's not perfect, I'm not perfect. So there's friction involved. But when you work for Hashem, even if Hashem gives you an incredible workload, He makes you work very, very, very hard. And He pushes you. Because you trust that He doesn't have an ulterior motive. He's not taking advantage of you. He's not using you. He's not enslaving you. What he's doing is good for you. In that work, you are free. The harder you work, the freer you are. This is really emes. The truth of the matter is, it's true no matter what. But if you live in Stalinist Russia, the harder you work, the bigger a fool you are. Why? Because nobody cares about you. You're a cog. You're a spoke in a wheel. But when you live in a free society, and when you work hard and when you give back, that's your blessing. That's your freedom. That's your goodness. That's your life. And that's what the Chazal are saying. We're not free because we have no master. We are free because we have a master. But our master is God. You understand? When you have a human master who suppresses you and he crushes you, and you live for him, that's slavery. But when you have a master who works you very, very hard, but in the work that the master is giving you, you are you, not him. That work is freedom. I was reading this morning a book, and by the way, I want to advertise this. This is an English-speaking crowd. There's a book that came out literally 2 weeks ago for the Kinnas HaShluchim called Shadar, S-H-A-D-A-R. It's a book about Rabbi Yossi from Los Angeles. I don't know if you know who that is. But it's one of the greatest chassidim of our time. One of the greatest chassidim of our time. It's an English book. I would encourage you to buy it and read it. I'm loving it. I didn't sleep well last night, and I read a lot of pages of this book. So one of the stories that I read was Rabbi Yossi married a girl named Rappaport, Leah Rappaport. Before the war, her parents were incredibly rich. Very, very, very rich. Exceedingly wealthy. After the war, there was nothing left. Nothing. She lost so many family members, it's sick. Sick, sick, sick. In one place alone, they killed 50 Rappaports. She survived with her mother and 3 sisters, and then one of the sisters died after the war, and then she had 2 sisters in her. So here was this girl who grew up in the lap of luxury, but she grew up in a very chassidish house. Before the war, there were homes that were very rich and very chassidish. And it's a chassidish house. She had brothers who were go'onim adinim, great masters of Torah. She was an 18-year-old girl when she got married. She was a child during the war. Anyway, she married Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi never had 2 nickels to rub together. They were I'm not going to call them very poor, but they were certainly broke. And they lived in Los Angeles. In 1949, they moved to Los Angeles. 1949, moving to Los Angeles is, I don't know what to compare it to. It's like going on shlichus to the Philippines. It's so far away, not only geographically, but the percentage of Frum Jews living in LA at the time. There was no school. There was barely kosher. And Rabbi Yossi showed up in LA, and there were many Frum people. He befriended everybody, Frum and not Frum. He was all of 30. In other words, the guys he was befriending were not younger than him, they were his age. Also survivors, but they didn't see him as an equal. They saw him as their father. These were all survivors. I was reading Beryl Weiss and Moshe Weiss. Rabbi Yossi was, they all lost their families in the war. They all came alone to the West. They found women, their husbands, and they got married and they built lives. Rabbi Yossi was every one of their fathers. And they look back at it in hindsight, he was only 30. We treated him like a 50, 60-year-old wise man. He wasn't 50. He was very wise, but he was very young. He was their age. Anyway, they moved to LA, and it was very far away. She survived with her mother and 2 sisters. One of her sisters was living in Israel. Another one of her sisters ended up living in England, but her mother lived in New York. And she wanted to be with her mother. Could you imagine what this kid lost? I remember her. She was a happy lady. She was not a miserable, bitter lady at all. And she had so much to be bitter about. They all had so much to be bitter about. Anyway, I was in her home. She fed the whole, anybody wanted. Her house was like a soup kitchen, a public kitchen. They moved to Los Angeles in 1949. And the 2 of them, he was 30, and I think she was 18. He was 28, and she was 18. They were very young. She was much younger than him. And they started to do the Rebbe's work. But part of his job that he traveled a lot. He was gone from the home many months out of the year. And she was home alone, this little girl who was not used to working very hard, was suddenly thrust into this life. And she did it with such joy and such success and such blessing. I mean, there's so many people in this world who owe their life, let alone their Yiddishkeit, to the Reichiks. It's not normal. Incredibly successful. Shluchim. So here's a story which will drive you nuts. I read it 3:30 this morning when I couldn't sleep. The previous rebbe sent him on shlichus. Now you have to remember, this kid had no father, and no mother, had no brother, had no sister. So he lands in America, and all he had was the yeshiva. The yeshiva was his father, the yeshiva was his mother, the yeshiva was his uncle, the yeshiva was his aunt, the yeshiva was his brother, the yeshiva was his sister. He had nothing. And the rebbe immediately, the previous rebbe, sent him on trips all over the place. So he would come to yeshiva, he'd spend like 3 days, and then he'd go off on a trip to visit 6 or 7 cities, which take 2 or 3 weeks. He'd come back to New York. He'd lost his bedroom, so he'd move into a different dormitory room. He had like 100 roommates because he was never there. He'd stay in yeshiva for 4 or 5 days. He'd go back to the schedule, learn daven, and then boom, another trip. This is how he lived. Anyway, when it was time for dating, he would consult the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe treated all these kids, like you treat your own children. He mamish coddled them. He didn't stand on the top of the mountain and give instructions. He fathered them. I have a Machon, a fortunate Machon, named Rabbi Weinberg, Levi Weinberg. His father's Yossel Weinberg, who was also from these kids. And he wrote the Frierdiker Rebbe a letter in 1943 or 44 when he was courting his wife. It's one of the most extraordinary stories. He courted his wife to marry her, and at the same time was Makar of her to Yiddishkeit. And they had a Chassidish house. Can you imagine how special you have to be? How special you have to be. She was from. Her parents were from. Her father was from. Her father was a widower. But they were not, Chassidish. They were in Canada in the 1930s and 40s. And while they were Chassan Kala, he was teaching her how you made a Chassidish house. And she went along. It's extraordinary. So he wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe that, I have no father, I have no mother. So I need you to be my father and my mother. And he was. He answered the stupidest, silliest questions. He would share with the Frierdiker Rebbe the kinds of things that you'd be embarrassed to share with your rabbi, let alone with your Rebbe. He had no one else to talk to. And at a certain point, it suddenly hit him that he's really not behaving appropriately towards the Rebbe. So he wrote an apology letter. He says, I've been talking to you like my mother. I share with you that you wore red shoes on a date. I mean, you don't talk to the Frierdiker Rebbe about that. Or not red shoes on a date. And he apologized for bringing the Rebbe into such nonsense. And the Rebbe wrote him a beautiful answer. And the answer basically was, no, that's my job. Please, keep sharing. Tell me everything. I want to know everything. Don't be embarrassed. Whatever it is that's on your mind is on my mind. So the Rebbe had a similar relationship with the Frierdiker Rebbe. But his relationship was really cool. It was really cool. He was a tzaddik, so he had tzaddik treatment. He would go into the Frierdiker Rebbe and say, someone suggested I should meet this girl. He says, no, don't meet her. Not they would meet and it wouldn't work out, which is the normal procedure. Another girl, don't meet her. He just told him not to meet a girl. And he once complained to the Rebbe, I have to go through all these names. He didn't even meet them. And then one fine day he came up with a name, and they said, meet this girl. And that's the girl he married. Rabbi Reichik was really very special. Really. Even in that time he was very special. And the Rebbe Pasha didn't let him date the wrong girl. So they got married, they moved to Los Angeles. Sure. So he writes a letter to the Rebbe. He wants to come to the Rebbe for Tishrei, which would turn out to be the last Tishrei of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life. 1945, Tov Shin Yud. They moved in 1949. This is the end of October of 1949. So he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, can we come? They were shluchim, can we come? And the Rebbe said yes. So they came. He bumps into our Rebbe, the Ramash, who was then the son of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Now, he was the Frierdiker Rebbe's right hand. But he wasn't a Rebbe. In other words, the Rebbe fathered them and also Rebbe'd them. And the Rebbe says to him, what are you doing here? So he says to the Rebbe, I asked the Rebbe if I could come with my wife, and he said, yeah, so we're here. So the Rebbe says, if I was in charge, I wouldn't give you permission. Did you hear what I just said? Yeah. Our Rebbe, he was not yet a Rebbe, says, if I was in charge, I would not let you come. Now, of course, 5 months later, he was in charge, and he didn't let people come. It's a different generation. Rebbe was a tougher Rebbe than the Frierdiker Rebbe was. He really was. He was also kinder. It's a lot of whatever. The Rebbe is a bigger Rebbe. It's so big. Now, is that nice or not nice? You tell a kid from Poland who doesn't have a father, doesn't have a mother, who has a young wife. She doesn't even come from a Lubavitcher family. She wasn't even a Lubavitcher from home. She was a getter from home. She had a Lubavitcher nephew who was 25 years her senior, because his father married, between the oldest and youngest was 37 years. When she was born, she had great nephews and nieces. Her father was married twice. And the Rebbe says to him, if I was in charge, I wouldn't let you come. Is that nice? Is that nice? It's so insensitive.
No, it is nice.
Well, it's nice only if on one condition. If you know that the person who's telling that to you would treat himself the same way.
Right.
If you know that the person who's telling that to you is not doing it because he doesn't care about you, but because he does care about you. And there are very few people on this planet who earn that much trust. To trust another human being, to say, this person's going to send me into fire and it's love, well, yeah, it doesn't feel like, you understand? I have a friend, a friend that I know, who's a big Talmud Chacham. He's a scholar, he's a learned man. So when people come to Crown Heights, who are Talmidei Chacham and B'nai Teira, a lot of them come undercover, so they ask him to show them the neighborhood, to talk to them. So he told me many years ago that somebody came to Crown Heights from Israel, who's one of the most important Rosh Yeshiva in the yeshiva called Kerem B'Yavne. Kerem B'Yavne is, in America it would be called Modern Orthodox, in Israel it's called Mizrahi. They're very frum, and they love Israel like no other group. They're really wonderful people. And the Kerem B'Yavne schools have a very strong relationship with the Rebbe. It seems like the Rebbe has that idea. You know what Hesder is? Yeshiva and army together. The Rebbe was involved from the beginning. From the beginning, I think it was even the Rebbe's idea. In the early 1960s, late 50s, this notion of a military yeshiva, not a military school, was conceived, and the Rebbe supported it unbelievably. He was very deeply involved. Anyway, so this man visits Crown Heights, and he shows him the Rebbe's house and the Rebbe's library and the whole thing. So he tells my friend these words. He says, I want you to know, Rabbi Kook was a Rebbe. Have you heard the name Rabbi Kook? Yitzhak Isaac Alevi Kook. He passed away in 1936. He's gone 80 years. And he says he was a Rebbe. People worshipped him. I mean, he was so revered during his lifetime. He said, but shlichus, to get people to leave their home and their family and their country and their community and go live no place, he says he could not get his people to do that. They wouldn't listen to him. They just wouldn't go. Only the Rebbe. Now, why do you think that is? Now, I'm not going to pass judgment on Rabbi Kook. The point is, people went on shlichus with the Rebbe because they knew that he's not treating them any different than he treats himself. They knew that he's with them on the shlichus. And shluchim knew that, and they experienced it, and they felt it. People went on shlichus with joy. You're going to sacrifice your whole life, you, your wife, and your children, you, your husband, and your children, for other people, and you're delighted to do it. Now, where does it come from? When you know that the person giving you the work knows that this is the right thing and it's the best thing, that's freedom. Shluchim are the most incredible human beings. They're not suffering. They're not imprisoned. They're free. And they're never freer than when they do the work of shlichus. Think about it. So my point is, and I've been talking in circles, really, is the Jewish people leave Egypt and they become free, not in not having a master, but in having a master. But the kind of master who doesn't take their will away, as the slave, a slave doesn't have his own will, it's his master's will. But the kind of master that helps actualize one will, maximize what a person could be. And that's what Yiddishkeit is. Yiddishkeit has 613 mitzvahs. I don't know if you know, but that's an awful lot of mitzvahs. Mitzvahs in the morning, mitzvahs in the afternoon, mitzvahs at night, mitzvahs Sunday, mitzvahs Monday, mitzvahs Tuesday. You're never rid of mitzvahs. You always got to do mitzvahs. A yarmulke, tzitzis, tefillin, a bracha, krishma, tefillah. We're always busy with mitzvahs. And it's a pain in the neck. But it's not a pain in the neck. It's freedom. We are bigger people because our lives are more intense. And it's a fact. Everybody understands it. But you have to choose the intensity. When the intensity is imposed upon you, it's somebody else's intensity. When the trudum is, when you volunteer for it, then it's freedom. So the Mishnah says, you should know, we're free because we're slaves of God. Okay?